Hello! Today I'm going to show you how to make some really simple mini watercolor landscapes. I'm using Viviva watercolor sheets. I love these because they have really intense bold colors and they're super portable for easy setup and cleanup. For most of this, I'll also be using my King Art oval petal brush. I got this in an Art Snack subscription box a couple of years ago, and I definitely use it the most for all my watercolor stuff. I love how it's kind of a mix between a flat and a round brush, so you can get the even, thick washes like with a flat brush, but then at the same time, you can utilize the point for little details, so I find this to be really, really versatile. Though I love watercolor, I'm on a budget, so I don't use the really fancy paper often, but I ended up finding some scraps of this Arches super thick, really bumpy watercolor paper that I cut down into ACEO size. I do find that for this style of watercolor that I'm doing today, I do get a way better overall finished look with this paper. I just really like how it comes out. I love how it absorbs the color, and I love that you see that little bit of texture. Now, typically with watercolor, you always work from the background to the foreground, but with these, I've actually been doing kind of the opposite a little bit and adding the ground first, which I guess is kind of the middle ground in some of these, depending if I add trees or not. And then doing the sky, which I normally do first, last. When you're doing just flat streaks of color and layering like this, the order isn't as important as with typical more detailed watercolor pieces. I'm starting with watercolor that is very dark and bold and just has a tiny bit of water in it as I streak across, and then I'm gradually adding more and more water, getting the paper super saturated so that I get some really nice bleeding and some interesting textures in the transition from dark to light. And then when I add in some additional colors as well, they'll kind of start to bleed and twist around in the wet areas versus how they act in the dry areas. And having this texture is really important for adding dimension to your piece, since we are being really impressionistic, working with primarily just streaks of color on a very small scale. As I mentioned, I'm working in sections, so after I get all the grounds finished, it's very important that I take a pause and let that dry completely before I go on to the other parts of my mini paintings. For the skies, I'm adding a lot more water to my paper, and in some cases just lightly tapping with the color. And when I get that really dark, bold color, that again always is a quality of these Viviva color sheets, which is something I really like, I'm making sure that I splash on a lot of water afterwards to dilute it and let it run and spread out, because I don't want the sky to be too dark or to be just the same value as the ground so that they end up just blending together. I'm being very intuitive and really just letting the color run and do what it wants to do, which this paper again is great for because it's so thick. It can hold a ton of water, and even when I make a literal puddle, it's still just sitting on the surface and able to be played with, so that's really great. With watercolor, the quality of the paper is very, very important. So if you have to skimp somewhere, don't ever skimp on the paper. Though, again, you don't necessarily have to get this super fancy paper I'm using today. I'm switching to a smaller brush to add the details. And again, because these are only 2.5 by 3.5 inch little cards, most of the details I'm adding are just tapping up and down, making little splotches with my brush in the basic shape of what I want to create. So splotches in a circular shape or oval or rounded triangle shape for flowers. Little speckles in a textured, tall, skinny triangle shape for trees. Speckles in a more rounded, bushy shape for other foliage. I'm using a lot of contrasting colors to really have some vibrancy with these, and so because of that, I'm being very careful when I'm adding color to, again, just tap really gently so that it doesn't get out of control, and I'm not just streaking across my whole paper back and forth like I might usually do with a larger piece, because this can very quickly turn brown, especially when you're using colors that are opposites on the color wheel, like blue and orange. You don't want those two colors to completely mix together, or it's going to look really yucky. It is okay to leave white space or very, very light space with hardly any color. Again, that adds to the value contrast and makes your pieces more dynamic. And you can always blot with a paper towel to remove color as needed, which I've done a couple of times. A lot of times blotting will also lift your pigment unevenly, which that could be something I do intentionally, especially with skies, to give a cloudy look. These are so fun because you can do a lot with basically one or two brushes, some colors, and just a couple different basic brush strokes. And you can pretty quickly turn these out, and you can even work on more than one at once, like I've done, to allow for drying time in between. I hope you're inspired to make some mini art at home. And as always, if you have any questions or run into some trouble, feel free to comment or message me. I'm always happy to help. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video and want to see more art demos, tutorials, and just all things creativity, be sure to subscribe.